The galaxy was old, and most of it was mapped. Ships moved between stars the way trucks once moved between cities on old Earth, carrying cargo, carrying people, carrying news. Thousands of species had built the coalition, a loose union of worlds that shared trade routes, shared laws, and shared one very old, very strict rule. No ship goes into human space. It was written into every navigation computer in the coalition. It was taught to every pilot before they were given a license. It was marked on every star chart with a thick red line, and past that line was a region of space simply labeled, "Do not enter, human territory." Most species did not know why the rule existed. They only knew that it was old, that it had never been broken twice by the same person, and that the Coalition Council enforced it without exception. Some believed humans were monsters. Some believed the whole thing was a myth, invented by the Council to hide something valuable. Some did not think about it at all. Space was big, and human space was just one more place a person did not need to go. Captain Torv Vesey did not believe in monsters. He was Saloon, a species with long limbs, gray skin, and 4 eyes that could see in almost total darkness. He was 31 years old, which for a Salon was young enough to still be reckless and old enough to know better. He commanded a trade ship called the Wandering Prophet, a boxy, rust-colored vessel that hauled cheap goods between small outposts on the edge of Coalition space. It was not a glamorous job. It was not even a very good job, but it was his ship, bought with a loan he was still paying off, and he intended to make it work. The trouble started on a delivery run to the mining colony of Kessadre. "Captain," said his first mate, a Vren named Oshu, "the fast route runs along the human border. If we take it, we save 11 days. Torv looked at the star chart on the display. The safe route, the legal route, curved wide around a shaded red zone. The fast route cut close to the edge of that zone, close enough that a navigation error of even a few hours could put them over the line. "How close is close?" Torv asked. 2 light hours from the boundary marker, if we hold a tight course," Oshu said. "It is legal. Ships pass along that corridor all the time. And if we drift?" Oshu's shoulders rose in the Vren equivalent of a shrug. "Then we drift. Nobody has crossed the line in 50 years, Captain. There is nothing over there to hit. It's empty." Torv thought about the loan payment due in 9 days. He thought about the fuel cost of the long route. He thought about the 12 crates of medical supplies sitting in his cargo hold, promised to a colony that needed them soon, and the bonus payment that came with early delivery. "Set the fast course," he said. It was not a wild decision. It was the kind of decision made by tired captains 100 times a day across the galaxy, a small risk taken for a real reward. The corridor along the border was used by cargo runners all the time, exactly as Oshu said. Nobody expected anything to happen. That was the whole point of a border nobody had crossed in 50 years. It had stopped feeling dangerous. It had started to feel like a rule left over from an older, more frightened time, the kind of rule nobody quite dared to remove from the books, but nobody truly respected anymore either. The Wandering Prophet left Kessadre's home system 3 days later, cargo loaded, fuel tanks full, and turned its nose toward the fast corridor. The first day was uneventful. The ship moved through open space at cruising speed, past a scattering of uninhabited systems, past a beacon buoy marking a refueling station nobody used anymore. Torv spent most of his time in the cockpit, half watching the sensors, half reading cargo manifests on a datapad. Oshu ran diagnostics. The rest of the crew, 4 Salon and 2 Vren, kept to their usual routines, sleeping, eating, playing games in the crew lounge, complaining about the food. On the second day, the storm came. It was not a storm in the way a planet has storms. It was a solar event, a burst of charged particles thrown out by a nearby star that the ship's charts had marked as stable, and had been stable, as far as anyone knew, for the last 200 years. Stars did not always follow the rules written about them. This one threw a flare far larger than anything on record, and the wave of radiation and particles rolled outward through the system faster than any ship could outrun. Alarms filled the cockpit. "Radiation surge," Oshu called out, hands moving fast across the console. "Shields at 80% and dropping. Captain, this is going to hit the navigation array." "Compensate," Torv said, gripping the arms of his chair as the ship shuddered. "Bring us about." Get some distance. The lights flickered. The hum of the engines stuttered, caught, and steadied again. But something in the navigation computer did not steady. A cascade of small errors, the kind no single person would ever notice, built up inside the guidance system in the space of 11 seconds. The ship's course, plotted to hold 2 light hours from the boundary, began to drift. Nobody saw it happen. That was the terrible, ordinary truth of it. There was no dramatic moment, no red light flashing, warning, entering human space. There was only a small, silent shift in the numbers, buried under bigger, louder alarms about shield strength and radiation exposure and hull temperature. By the time the storm passed and the crew had time to breathe, 3 hours had gone by, and the wandering prophet was drifting quietly across a line on a map that nobody in the cockpit was looking at. "Status report," Torv said, rubbing his eyes. "Anyone hurt?" "No injuries," Oshu said. "Shields held. Some damage to the outer hull plating. Nothing serious. Navigation is recalibrating now." "Good. Get us back on course. I want to make up the time we lost." Oshu worked the console for a moment, then went still. "Captain," Oshu said, in a different voice, "I need you to look at this." Torv leaned over. On the display, the ship's current position blinked in soft blue, next to a thick red line that ran across the star chart like a scar. The blue dot was not near the red line. It was past it. For a long moment, nobody in the cockpit said anything at all. "That can't be right," Torv said finally. "Run it again." Oshu ran it again. The numbers came back the same. The storm's radiation had thrown off the navigation array just enough, for just long enough, to carry them nearly 4 light hours off their intended course, enough to cross from coalition space into the edge of the region marked on every chart in the galaxy as forbidden. "We're in human space," Oshu said, and the words came out strange, like a sentence nobody had ever expected to actually say out loud. "Captain, we are inside the boundary." Torv felt something cold move through his chest, the kind of fear that comes not from danger you can see, but from danger you have spent your whole life being told is real, without ever quite believing it. He had grown up hearing the stories, same as everyone. He had also grown up believing, quietly, that the stories were exaggerated, the way all old warnings get exaggerated with time. 50 years without a single crossing. 50 years of the red line on the map meaning nothing more than an inconvenience for cargo routes. "How far in?" he asked. "Not far. A little over half a light hour past the boundary. If we turn now, full burn, we can be back across the line in..." Oshu checked the numbers. 40 minutes. "Do it," Torv said. "Now. Full burn. I don't care about fuel." The ship groaned as the engines pushed past their normal limits, turning the wandering prophet's nose back toward the red line on the chart, back toward the safety of ordinary, mapped, familiar space. Torv sat forward in his chair, 4 eyes fixed on the display, watching the blue dot begin its slow crawl back toward the boundary. It was Oshu who saw the new object appear on the sensors first. "Captain." The word came out flat, careful, the voice of someone trying very hard not to sound as frightened as they felt. "We have a contact." "Where?" "Behind us. It wasn't there 30 seconds ago." Oshu's hands hovered over the console, not quite steady. "Captain, it's matching our course. It's not hailing us. It's just... there." Torv looked at the sensor display. A single blip had appeared on their tail. Close. Far closer than any ship should have been able to get without the wandering prophet's sensors picking it up earlier. It was not broadcasting an identification code. It was not broadcasting anything at all. It was simply there, holding position exactly behind them, matching their speed without seeming to strain at it. "Options," Torv said. His voice had lost its steadiness. "None," Oshu said. "We can't outrun it. We don't know what it is. And if it wanted to fire on us, it would have already had 10 chances to do it. Captain, I think..." Oshu stopped. "Say it. I think that's a human ship." The words hung in the cockpit air like smoke. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Every member of the crew who had drifted toward the cockpit doorway to see what the commotion was about now stood frozen, staring at the small silent blip on the screen that was matching their course. Exactly. Patiently. Without a single word. Torv opened a comm channel, hands shaking slightly as he worked the controls. "This is the trade vessel, Wandering Prophet. Registered out of Kessa Dre, he said, keeping his voice as level as he could. We are experiencing a navigation malfunction due to a solar event. We are correcting course to leave this region immediately. We mean no. He hesitated on the word, then made himself say it. We mean no harm. We are not here to cause trouble. Please, we are leaving. There was no answer. The blip on the sensor did not change speed, did not change distance, did not respond to the hail in any way that Torv or Oshu could detect. It simply followed, calm and unhurried, as the wandering prophet burned every bit of fuel it had to cross back over the red line on the star chart. 20 minutes to boundary, Oshu said quietly. Torv watched the silent shape on the sensor and felt, for the first time in his life, the particular fear of a person who has just realized that a rule he never truly believed in was real all along, and that he had broken it, and that whatever was behind him had all the time in the world to decide what happened next. The stories said no ship that broke the rule was ever heard from again. Nobody in the coalition had proof of what happened to those ships. There were no wrecks to study, no survivors to question, no distress calls ever received. There was only the silence, and the red line on the map, and 50 years of nobody testing it. Torv Vesey was about to learn why. 19 minutes, Oshu said, and the silent shape behind them held its distance, patient as a held breath, and did not fall away. The silent shape stayed behind the wandering prophet for 19 minutes, and in all that time, it never once fired a weapon, never once spoke, and never once fell back. It simply followed, patient as gravity, while Torv Vesey's ship burned toward the red line on the star chart, with every bit of fuel its engines could give. 15 minutes, Oshu said. Torv did not answer. He was watching the sensor readout, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The shape behind them gave off almost no energy signature. It did not appear to be scanning them, or if it was, the scan was so quiet the wandering prophet's old sensors could not detect it. It simply sat there in the dark, a shadow with no name, and let them run. "Why isn't it doing anything?" whispered one of the crew members near the cockpit door, a young saloon named Prell who had been with Torv for less than a year. "Why doesn't it just shoot us?" "Maybe it's not a weapon ship," Oshu said, though the words did not sound like they came from a place of real hope. "Maybe it's just watching us." 10 minutes, Torv said, more to himself than anyone else. The wandering prophet shuddered as it pushed past its rated speed, metal groaning under the strain, the engines running hotter than they had ever run in the 8 years Torv had owned the ship. He watched the fuel gauge fall and did not care. Fuel could be replaced. He wanted, more than he had ever wanted anything, to see that red line pass beneath them and know they were back in space where the old fear did not apply. At 4 minutes to the boundary, the silent shape spoke for the first time. It was not a threat. It was not even loud. A single, calm voice came through the comm system, speaking in the trade language used across half the coalition, clear and steady, and completely without anger. "Wandering Prophet, this is Border Watch Station 6. You have been tracked since you entered restricted space. Reduce speed to standard cruising velocity, and hold your current heading. Do not attempt evasive maneuvers. You are not currently in danger. Compliance will keep it that way." Torv's hands froze over the console. "They're talking to us," Prell said, disbelief plain in his voice. "Reduce speed," Torv said quickly, cutting the engines back from their overdriven burn to something closer to normal. "Oshu, do it now, exactly as they say." "Captain, if we slow down, we lose our chance to cross the boundary before." "I know," Torv said. "Do it anyway." The ship slowed. The silent shape closed the distance slightly, no longer holding back, easing up alongside the wandering prophet, close enough now that its outline became visible on the visual display. It was not large. It was not covered in visible weapons the way coalition warships often were, bristling with turrets and missile pods to make their strength obvious to anyone who looked at them. It was sleek, dark, and quiet, built in a way that suggested its makers had never felt the need to impress anyone. It simply looked like it belonged where it was, calm and certain, the way a shark does not need to announce that it is dangerous. "This is Captain Torv Vesey of the Wandering Prophet," Torv said into the comm, working hard to keep the shake out of his voice. "We are complying. We had a navigation failure during a solar storm. It was an accident. We did not mean to cross into your space. There was a pause, brief but noticeable, before the voice answered again. Understood, Captain Vesey. Accidents happen. We are aware of the solar event. Our own instruments recorded it as well. Your ship's flight data will be reviewed to confirm your account. In the meantime, you will be escorted to Border Watch Station 6 for processing. This is standard procedure. No harm will come to your crew provided you continue to cooperate. Processing, Torv repeated. What does that mean? It means questions, Captain, and an explanation of why the line exists. Follow our escort ship. We will bring you in slowly. The escort ship, Torv still did not know what to call it. Warship felt wrong for something so quiet. Watcher felt closer to the truth, eased into position ahead of the wandering prophet and began to move, unhurried, toward a destination not marked on any chart Torv had ever seen. The crew of the trade ship followed in silence, because there was nothing else to do. Border Watch Station 6 did not look like a fortress. That was the first thing Torv noticed as it came into view on the display, a structure hanging in open space near a quiet, unremarkable star. It was large, easily 10 times the size of the wandering prophet, built in smooth, curved lines rather than the harsh angles most coalition military stations favored. There were no visible weapon batteries lining its hull, no fleet of warships parked around it in a show of force. It looked almost peaceful, floating there in the dark, humming with a quiet kind of activity that suggested the people inside it were simply going about their day. That, somehow, was more unsettling than a wall of guns would have been. They're opening a docking bay, Oshu reported, voice tight. They want us to bring the ship inside. Do it, Torv said. The wandering prophet eased through the open bay doors into a wide, well-lit chamber, filled with the low hum of machinery and the distant sound of voices. Torv had expected soldiers. He had expected weapons pointed at his ship the moment the bay doors closed behind them. Instead, as the docking clamps locked into place and the engines wound down, he saw through the cockpit viewport a small group of figures waiting calmly near the edge of the bay, dressed not in heavy armor, but in simple, practical uniforms, the kind worn by people who did their jobs every day and did not need to look frightening to do them well. Captain, Oshu said quietly, those are humans. Torv had seen images of humans before, in old records, in trade catalogs, in the rare documentary that made it out through coalition media channels. He had never seen one in person. They looked, he thought, unremarkable. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, a little shorter on average than a Salin, softer around the edges, with none of the obvious physical traits, no claws, no visible strength, no armor plating under the skin, that made other dangerous species dangerous to look at. They looked, if anything, fragile. That was the second thing that unsettled him. If these were the guardians of the most feared border in the galaxy, and they looked like this, then whatever made them dangerous was not visible at all. The airlock cycled open. A human stepped forward, a woman with short dark hair and calm, steady eyes, flanked by 2 others who hung back slightly, watching the crew of the wandering prophet with quiet, professional attention rather than open hostility. Captain Vesey, she said, and her voice, in person, carried the same even calm it had over the comm. I'm Commander Reyes. Welcome to Border Watch Station 6. I know this isn't how you planned to spend your week. Torv opened his mouth, closed it, and finally managed, No, it is not. Nobody's going to hurt you or your crew, Reyes said. I want to say that clearly first, because I know what the stories say about this border, and most of them are wrong in the details even if they're right about the seriousness of the rule. You made a mistake. We've already confirmed the solar event in our own instruments, and your flight recorder backs up your account. This wasn't an attack. We know the difference. Then, what happens now? Torv asked. Now, Reyes said, you and I are going to have a conversation. Your crew will be looked after, fed, given quarters to rest in, while we finish confirming your story. And you're going to learn why that line exists, Captain, because I don't think anyone ever properly explained it to you. Almost nobody outside human space really understands it anymore. That's part of the problem. She turned and began walking toward a corridor leading deeper into the station, clearly expecting him to follow. Torv glanced back at his crew, Oshu's face carefully blank, Prell's eyes wide with a fear he was trying and failing to hide, the others standing close together near the ship. And then he followed the commander, because there was, again, nothing else to do. The corridor was clean, well lit, and quiet. The walls lined with what looked like simple informational displays, star charts, duty rosters, nothing dramatic or threatening. It was, Torv thought, an oddly ordinary place for a border that had haunted the edges of Coalition space for 50 years. "You want to know why nobody's crossed this line in half a century?" Reyes said as they walked. "It's simple, really. The first few who tried, a long time ago, didn't believe the warnings either. Ships came through by accident, same as you. And some came through on purpose, testing us, probing to see what we'd do. We answered every single one of them the same way." "How?" Torv asked, though some part of him already dreaded the answer. "Clearly," Reyes said, "and completely. We don't do half measures at this border, Captain. Not because we're cruel. Because we learned, a long time ago, that half measures get misread as weakness, and weakness invites more testing. So every response we give is total, every time, no exceptions. It's not about anger. It's about making sure nobody ever has to ask twice." Torv felt the cold feeling from the cockpit return, settling deeper this time. "And which response am I going to get?" Reyes stopped walking and looked at him, and for the first time, something almost like sympathy crossed her steady expression. "That depends on you, Captain," she said. "It depends on what you do next. Come on, let's talk somewhere you can sit down. This is a longer conversation than you think, and I'd rather you hear all of it before you decide how frightened to be." She led him through a set of double doors into a quiet briefing room, gestured to a chair, and waited until he sat before taking one across from him. On the wall behind her, a star map glowed softly, the red boundary line running across it exactly as it did on every chart in the galaxy, except here, on this side of the line, it was not marked "Do Not Enter." Here it was simply marked "Home." 51 years ago, Reyes began, this border didn't exist. And the story of why it does now is the story every person in human space grows up hearing before they're old enough to understand all of it. I'm going to tell it to you the way we tell it to our own children, Captain Vesey, because I think it's time someone outside this line finally heard it properly. Torv said nothing. He only sat very still and listened as the commander began to speak. 51 years ago, Commander Reyes said, humanity was not part of the coalition. We were not part of anything. We were a young species, only a few centuries into space travel, still fighting among ourselves more often than not, still figuring out how to be one people instead of 100 arguing nations. We had colonies on a handful of nearby worlds. We had no idea the wider galaxy was as crowded as it turned out to be. "You didn't know about the coalition?" Torv asked. "We knew something was out there. We'd found old wreckage, strange signals, the kind of hints that told us we weren't alone. But we hadn't made contact with anyone yet. Then a coalition survey fleet found us instead." Reyes's voice did not change as she spoke, but something in her eyes did, a distance settling into them, the look of someone recounting a story they had heard many times but never stopped feeling the weight of. "The species that found us called themselves the Doran Compact. They were explorers mostly, mapping unclaimed space, looking for resources and new members to bring into the coalition. When they found a species with cities and ships and no idea how large the galaxy really was, they didn't see equals. They saw an opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" "Humanity had resources the Doran wanted, rare minerals, fertile worlds, a large population that could be put to work, and humanity had no idea how outmatched we were. The Doran Compact didn't bother with diplomacy. They came in force, took one of our colony worlds within a week, and told the rest of humanity to accept coalition rule or watch the same thing happen to every world we had." Torv felt something uneasy settle in his stomach. He had heard, distantly, growing up, that the coalition's expansion in its early centuries had not always been gentle. He had never heard it described so plainly. "What did humanity do?" he asked. "We fought," Reyes said simply. "We had no fleet that could match theirs. We had no allies. We had colonies spread thin, and a homeworld that had barely finished learning to work together as one species instead of 100 different countries. By any reasonable measure, We should have lost quickly and quietly, the way a dozen other species had lost to the Doran Compact before us. But you didn't. No, we didn't. Reyes leaned back slightly. Humanity has always had a strange relationship with being told it can't win something. The Doran Compact expected a short campaign, a show of force, a surrender, new subjects added to the Coalition's records. Instead, they got 7 years of war. Every world we lost, we made expensive. Every fleet they sent, we studied, and we adapted, and the next fleet cost them more than the last. We didn't have their technology. So we built strange things instead, things their doctrine didn't account for, because we had nothing to lose by trying ideas nobody else considered reasonable. She paused, and for a moment the room was quiet except for the low hum of the station around them. By the 5th year, the Doran Compact was losing more than it could afford to keep losing. By the 6th, other coalition members were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about why a species this young, this outmatched on paper, was still fighting, and fighting well. By the 7th year, humanity had pushed the Doran fleet entirely out of our systems, and taken the war to worlds the Doran considered safely their own. That's not possible, Torv said, before he could stop himself. A species that young, against an established coalition power. It happened, Reyes said, without any pride in her voice, only a kind of tired honesty. It happened because we did not know we were supposed to lose, and by the time we understood how outmatched we were supposed to be, we had already stopped losing. The Coalition Council intervened before the war went further. They forced a treaty. The Doran Compact withdrew all claims on human systems, paid reparations for the colony they'd destroyed, and humanity was recognized as an independent power, rather than a species to be conquered. So the war ended well for you. It ended, Reyes said. Whether it ended well depends on who you ask. We won our independence. We also learned in 7 years exactly what the rest of the galaxy was willing to do to a species it considered smaller and weaker. And we learned that the only thing that had stopped it from happening to us permanently was our own willingness to make the cost of trying us not worth paying. She tapped a control on the table, and the star map behind her shifted, zooming out to show human space as it existed now, a modest cluster of systems ringed by the thick red boundary line. After the war, humanity had a choice to make, she continued. We could try to join the coalition properly, open our borders, trade freely, become one more member species among hundreds, and hope that our reputation from the war would be enough to keep anyone from trying what the Doran Compact tried. Or we could close our borders entirely, keep to ourselves, and make absolutely certain that nobody ever again had the chance to find us unprepared. You chose to close the borders. We chose both, in a way, Reyes said. We trade with the coalition. We have diplomats, agreements, some cultural exchange. But our space, the systems where we actually live, where our fleets are based, where our people raise their children, that stays sealed. No ship enters without invitation. No exceptions. Because exceptions are exactly the kind of gap that let the Doran Compact catch us unprepared the first time. We nearly lost everything because someone assumed we were weak enough to test. We decided, as a species, that nobody would ever get to make that assumption safely again. Torv sat with that for a long moment, turning it over. And ships that cross the line by accident, like mine, what happens to them? In the first years after the border was drawn, we made an example, Reyes said, and her voice grew quieter, more careful. A coalition survey ship crossed in, testing us, exactly the way the Doran fleet had once tested our old homeworld's outer colonies. We answered completely. The ship did not return, and neither did the message it was sent to deliver, except for one message, which we made sure got back to the Coalition Council through proper channels. It said, simply, that the border was not a suggestion. And since then? Since then, almost nobody has tested us on purpose. 51 years, and you are only the 9th ship to cross this line at all, accident or otherwise. The 8 before you were accidents too. Storms, equipment failures, the occasional lost pilot. Every one of them was treated the way you are being treated now, questioned, confirmed, and returned, unharmed, once we were certain the crossing was truly unintentional. Reyes met his eyes. You are very lucky, Captain Vesey, that your story checks out. Because the moment we decide it doesn't, This conversation ends very differently. Torv swallowed. What would you have done if it hadn't checked out? The same thing we do to anyone who crosses this line meaning us harm, Reyes said simply. Whatever was necessary to make certain they never got the chance to cause it. And whatever was necessary to make certain the people who sent them understood, clearly, without any room for misunderstanding, that it would never be worth trying again. She stood, walking to the star map, tracing the red boundary with one finger. The galaxy has mostly forgotten why this line matters, she said. 51 years is a long time. New generations grow up hearing about the human border, the way children hear old ghost stories, something frightening but distant, something that probably isn't as serious as it sounds. Cargo captains take shortcuts along the edge because nothing bad has happened to anyone in decades. The fear fades. That's natural. But the reason the line is still here hasn't faded at all, Captain. We haven't forgotten a single day of that war. We built our entire relationship with the rest of the galaxy around making sure it never happens again. Torv thought of Oshu, waiting somewhere in the station with the rest of the crew, and of the loan payment due in 9 days, and of how small and ordinary his own reasons for cutting the fast corridor now seemed, set against everything Reyes had just told him. I understand, he said quietly. I really do. I'm sorry we crossed the line, even by accident. I didn't know. I believe you, Reyes said, and that's exactly why you're sitting here talking to me, instead of somewhere much less comfortable. But Captain, there's something else you need to know before we send you home. Something that isn't part of the old story. Something happening right now, on the other side of this border, that's about to make this entire situation a great deal more complicated than a single lost cargo ship. Torv felt his stomach tighten again. What do you mean? Reyes turned from the star map, and for the first time, her calm expression carried something sharper underneath it. While you were crossing back over the line, Captain, your ship's distress beacon and navigation logs were automatically relayed through the last Coalition relay station you passed. It's standard equipment, required on all registered trade vessels. Nothing you could have prevented. She paused. But it means that somewhere back in Coalition space, right now, someone already knows a ship crossed into human territory. And knowing the Salun trade cartels the way I do, Captain Vesey, I don't think they're going to wait patiently for you to come home and explain what happened. Far across the boundary, in a Coalition command center light years from Border Watch Station 6, an alarm was already sounding, and a fleet commander with far less patience than Reyes was already reading the same navigation logs and reaching a very different conclusion. Fleet Commander Draus Kell had never trusted the stories about human space. He was Kryeth, a species built for war the way some species were built for trade or diplomacy, tall and heavily muscled, with a hide tough enough to shrug off small arms fire. He had spent 40 years in Coalition military service, had commanded fleets against pirates, against rebellious colonies, against 2 minor wars nobody outside the military remembered anymore. He had never once fought humans, and privately, he had always suspected the old stories of the human-Doran War were exaggerated, the way old war stories always grew larger with each retelling. So when the report reached his command center that a Salun trade vessel, the Wandering Prophet, had crossed into human territory and its beacon signal had gone dark, Draus Kell did not think of it as a tragedy. He thought of it as an opportunity. Confirm the last known position, he said, standing over the tactical display in his flagship, the Coalition cruiser Steadfast Resolve. Confirmed, Commander, his tactical officer said. The vessel crossed the boundary here, in the fast corridor. Beacon signal cut out 11 minutes after crossing. No further transmissions. And the Council's official response? Standard diplomatic protest, filed through proper channels. They're requesting information on the crew's status. No military action authorized. Draus Kell made a low sound in his throat, something between a laugh and a growl. The Council has been filing polite protests at that border for 50 years and gotten nothing back but silence. Meanwhile, our cargo fleets lose 11 days on every run, because everyone is too frightened of a rumor to use the fast corridor properly. He straightened. I am not interested in another polite protest. I am interested in finding out what actually happened to that ship, and if humans have harmed Coalition citizens without provocation, in making certain they understand there are consequences for that. Commander, his second-in-command said carefully, The Council specifically prohibited military action near the human boundary. If we move the fleet, the Council will thank me when I bring back proof that the stories were exaggerated, or bring back the crew of that ship alive, whichever we find first, Drauskel said. Either way, someone needs to test this border properly, with force behind them, instead of sending unarmed cargo ships to die quietly and calling it fate. I have 4 warships under my command and a mandate to protect coalition trade routes. That mandate is broad enough for what I intend to do. It was not entirely true, and some part of Drauskel knew it. His orders were to patrol the trade lanes near the boundary, not to cross it. But 50 years of an unbroken rule had worn thin against 50 years of nothing happening to prove the rule mattered, and Drauskel was, in the end, a soldier who had spent his whole career being told that a species with no advanced weapons, no large fleet, and no allies could somehow still be dangerous enough to warrant a permanent no-fly line drawn across a quarter of the galaxy. He did not believe it. He wanted, more than he had wanted almost anything in his career, to be the commander who proved it wrong. Set a course, he said. We're going to find that ship, or find out what happened to it. And if the humans have a problem with that, they can explain it to my face instead of hiding behind a line on a map. 4 coalition warships crossed the boundary 18 hours after the Wandering Prophet had crossed it by accident. There was nothing accidental about this crossing. Drauskel brought his fleet in at full readiness, shields raised, weapons armed, sensors sweeping wide in every direction, prepared for whatever the old stories claimed waited on the other side of the line. For the first 2 hours, they found nothing. No contacts, his tactical officer reported, for the 4th time. No installations, no patrols, nothing on sensors at all. Commander, either human space is far larger and emptier than the charts suggest, or they are very good at not being seen until they want to be, Drauskel said, watching the empty starfield on the main display, with a growing, uneasy feeling he refused to name as doubt. Increase sensor range. Keep the formation tight. They found the first sign of anything at the edge of the 4th hour. A single quiet buoy, floating in open space, broadcasting a simple, calm message on every frequency the fleet's sensors could pick up. You have entered human territory without authorization, the recorded voice said, in the same flat trade language Reyes had used with Torv, though there was no way for Drauskel to know that. This is your only warning. Reverse course immediately and return to coalition space. Continued advance will be treated as a hostile act. One warning, Drauskel said, and something in his chest, old and proud and unwilling to be intimidated by a recorded voice on a floating buoy, hardened into resolve. One warning, from a species that has never once shown its fleet to anyone. Helm, continue on course. Tactical, stay sharp, but we are not turning back over an automated message. The fleet continued forward. It took 11 more minutes before the first human ships appeared. They did not appear the way Coalition doctrine expected an intercepting force to appear, in a dramatic burst of engine flare and aggressive maneuvering meant to intimidate. They simply were there, 6 ships, where a moment before there had been empty space, arranged in a loose formation ahead of the Coalition fleet, holding position without any visible urgency at all. Drauskel's sensors struggled for a full 3 seconds to properly classify them, uncertain whether the ships had somehow evaded detection through stealth technology, or had simply arrived from somewhere his instruments hadn't been watching. Identify, he snapped. Working, Commander. Their hulls are unusual. Sensor returns don't match anything in the Coalition database. I'm reading 6 vessels, moderate size, no larger than our own cruisers. But Commander, the shield readings. His officer paused. The shield readings are nearly 3 times denser than anything we operate. That's not possible, Drauskel said. No species in the Coalition has shielding technology that far ahead of standard. They're not Coalition technology, Commander. That's rather the point of the border, isn't it? A single hail came through, calm, measured, the same even tone that had spoken from the buoy. Coalition fleet. This is Rear Admiral Chen Wu, commanding 3rd Border Defense Squadron. You have ignored one warning and crossed 40 light minutes into sovereign human territory with a military force. State your intent, immediately. Drauskel opened the return channel himself. This is Fleet Commander Draus Kell of the Coalition cruiser Steadfast Resolve. A Coalition trade vessel crossed this border by apparent accident, and its beacon went dark. I have come to determine the fate of its crew. If they are alive and unharmed, I require their immediate return. There was a pause, brief, unhurried, before the reply came. The vessel you're referring to is the Wandering Prophet, the human admiral said. Its crew is alive, unharmed, currently being processed at a border station, and is scheduled to be released back to Coalition space within the day, exactly as required under the standing agreement between our government and yours. That process was already underway before your fleet crossed this line, Commander. You did not need to bring warships to retrieve people who were never in danger. Draus Kell felt something cold settle in his stomach, the first real doubt he had allowed himself since leaving Coalition space. He pushed it down. 40 years of command had not been built by second-guessing himself in front of his crew. Then there is no reason for further tension, he said. We will accompany your squadron to retrieve our people and confirm their condition ourselves, and then withdraw. No, Admiral Chen Wu said, and for the first time, something harder entered the calm voice. You will withdraw now, back across the boundary, and the crew of the Wandering Prophet will be released to Coalition space through the same station and process that has handled every accidental crossing for 51 years. You do not get to bring 4 warships into our territory and negotiate new terms because you have decided the old ones move too slowly for your comfort. This is your second warning, Commander, and it is the last one you will receive. Draus Kell's second-in-command leaned close, voice low and urgent. Commander, their shields, their sensor profile, the way those 6 ships appeared out of nowhere, I recommend we withdraw. We came to verify the crew's safety, and we have that confirmation now. We came to prove the stories were exaggerated, Draus Kell said quietly, or find out they were true. I intend to find out which, properly, before I explain to the Council why I brought 4 warships across this line for nothing. He straightened, opening the channel again. Admiral Chen Wu, I do not take orders from a foreign power inside disputed territory. This border has never been recognized by formal coalition law, only by custom and 50 years of caution. I will hold position here until I have visual confirmation of my people's safety. The silence that followed was longer this time, long enough that Draus Kell began to wonder if the channel had closed. When Admiral Chen Wu spoke again, his voice had lost none of its calm, but something underneath it had changed, gone from patient to final. Fleet Commander Kell, he said, you have been given 2 warnings, which is one more than this border has offered anyone in 51 years. I want you to understand, clearly, that what happens next is not an attack. It is a demonstration. We are not going to destroy your fleet, though we could, and I want no confusion afterward about that fact. We are going to show you exactly why no ship goes into human space, so that you can return to the Coalition Council and make certain this particular mistake is never repeated by anyone else who reads your report. I don't require a demonstration, Draus Kell began, but the words died in his mouth as every display on the Steadfast Resolve's bridge went dark at once. Every system, every sensor, every weapon control, all of it, in the same silent instant, without a single shot being fired. Around him, in the sudden emergency lighting, his crew's voices rose in confused alarm, hands moving uselessly over dead consoles, and Draus Kell stood very still at the center of it, staring at the black, unresponsive screen, where a moment ago his tactical display had shown 6 human ships, holding a calm, patient formation. He understood, in that silence, with a clarity that turned his earlier confidence to ash, that the old stories had not been exaggerated at all. They had, if anything, understated the truth. The lights on the Steadfast Resolve did not come back for 6 full minutes. To Draus Kell, standing in the dark, listening to his crew's confused voices around him, it felt much longer. When the systems finally flickered back to life, one by one, the first thing his tactical officer reported, in a voice tight with disbelief, was that every weapon system on all 4 coalition ships had been remotely disabled, not damaged, not destroyed, simply switched off, as easily as a light in a room. Shields had been dropped to 0 and held there the entire time, without a single human vessel firing so much as a warning shot. Navigation had been locked, holding all 4 ships perfectly still in space, unable to advance, retreat, or maneuver in any direction. "They didn't fire on us," his second-in-command said slowly, staring at the readouts. "Commander, they didn't need to. They just turned us off." Kell said nothing. He was watching the main display, where the 6 human ships still held their calm, unhurried formation, exactly where they had been before the lights went dark, as though nothing at all had happened, as though disabling an entire coalition battle fleet without firing a shot was simply an ordinary Tuesday for them. The comm channel opened again, and Admiral Chen Wu's voice returned, as even and unhurried as it had been from the start. "Fleet Commander Kell," he said, "your weapons and navigation will remain locked for the next 30 minutes. This is not damage. Nothing on your ships has been harmed. When control is returned to you, I expect you to withdraw across the boundary immediately, and I expect the report you file with your council to be complete and honest. That is the only thing I am asking of you today." "How?" Kell said, and for the first time in the conversation his voice had lost its command, replaced by something closer to genuine confusion. "How is this possible? No coalition technology can disable a ship's systems remotely, not through active shielding, not at this range." "No coalition technology can," Admiral Chen Wu agreed. "That is rather the entire point of the border, Commander. 51 years ago, a species called the Doran Compact assumed humanity was too young and too unarmed to be worth taking seriously. They were wrong, and it cost them 7 years of war and every colony they tried to take from us. We have spent every year since then making certain that mistake could never happen to us again, and we did not stop simply because we won that war. We kept building, we kept improving, we kept asking ourselves what a stronger enemy might try next, and we made sure we were ready for it before they ever arrived." He paused, letting the words settle. "The Coalition has spent 51 years believing this border exists because we are hiding, Commander. It does not. It exists because we made a promise to ourselves, after that war, that no fleet would ever again cross into our space and find us unprepared. You crossed that line today, expecting an empty threat, backed by an old story. What you found instead was a border defended by a species that has spent half a century treating this exact scenario as an inevitability to plan for, rather than a fear to hide from. We were never hiding, Commander Kell. We were simply waiting to see if anyone would finally test us properly, so we could show them, once and clearly, that the line means exactly what it says." Kell looked around his bridge, at his crew standing helpless at dead consoles, at the calm, patient formation of 6 human ships that had disabled an entire coalition battle fleet without so much as scratching the paint on their hulls, and felt something he had not felt in 40 years of military service. The complete, total certainty that he had been wrong about something important, and that the cost of being wrong had, this time, been mercifully small, only because the people on the other side of the mistake had chosen restraint. "I understand," he said quietly. "I hope you do," Admiral Chen Wu said, "because the next fleet that crosses this line may not be commanded by someone we choose to be patient with. We showed you restraint today, because your intent, misguided as it was never truly hostile. You came looking for your people, not looking for a fight. That distinction matters to us, Commander, and it is the only reason your fleet is being sent home intact, instead of not being sent home at all. Do not mistake mercy for weakness. We do not offer it twice to the same offender." The channel closed. 30 minutes later, exactly as promised, control returned to every system on the Steadfast Resolve and its sister ships, weapons and navigation flickering back online as though they had never been touched. Kell gave the order to withdraw without another word, and the 4 coalition warships turned and crossed back over the red boundary line in silence, the 6 human ships watching them go without ever changing formation, without ever seeming, in any way, impressed or threatened by anything that had happened. Captain Torv Vesey was released from Border Watch Station 6, 4 hours after the coalition fleet's retreat, his ship refueled, his crew unharmed, his cargo untouched in the hold. Commander Reyes walked him personally to the docking bay, and before he boarded the Wandering Prophet, she stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. "You're going to go home and tell people what happened here," she said. "Some of them won't believe you. Some will think you're exaggerating. The way people always assume old warnings are exaggerated once enough years pass without incident. I want you to tell them anyway, exactly as it happened, because the truth matters more than whether people choose to believe it. I will, Torv said, and meant it. And Captain, the storm that pushed you off course, the navigation error, none of that was your fault. I want you to know that. You made one small, ordinary decision, to take a faster route to save time and fuel. The kind of decision every trade captain in this galaxy makes every single day. It cost you dearly this time, through no real fault of your own, and I am glad it did not cost you your life. But I want you to understand something else too, something I need you to carry home with the rest of the story. What's that? The line is not there because we think ordinary captains like you are dangerous, Reyes said. It's there because we learned, the hard way, that we cannot always tell the difference between an accident and a test until it is too late to matter. So we treat every crossing the same way, calm and total, every time, without exception. Not out of cruelty, but because consistency is the only thing that keeps a rule meaningful after 50 years of nothing happening to test it. You got mercy today, because your story was true. The next ship that crosses this line, on purpose, hoping the old warnings have gone soft with time, will not be so fortunate. Torv nodded slowly and boarded his ship and flew home across the same red line that had nearly ended everything, carrying with him a story that would spread, in the weeks that followed, from cargo bay to cargo bay, from station to station, across the whole width of Coalition space. The Coalition Council received Fleet Commander Draus Kell's report 3 weeks later. It was thorough, honest, exactly as Admiral Chen Wu had asked it to be, and it did more to restore respect for the human boundary than 50 years of quiet, unbroken silence ever had. Cargo captains stopped taking the fast corridor along the edge of human space, not because it had become more dangerous, but because for the first time in a generation, an entire galaxy had been reminded, in careful and specific detail, exactly why the old rule had been written in the first place. Draus Kell resigned his command 6 months later. He told very few people why, though those who asked directly were given the same quiet answer, that he had spent 40 years believing strength was something you could measure by counting ships and weapons, and that a single calm voice across a comm channel had taught him, in 30 minutes of powerless silence, that the deepest kind of strength was the kind that never needed to prove itself by force at all. On Border Watch Station 6, Commander Reyes filed her own report, brief and unremarkable, one of hundreds she had filed over her years at the border. A trade ship had crossed by accident. A coalition fleet had followed, uninvited and unwelcome. Both had been handled according to policy, calmly, completely, without unnecessary harm. It was, by the standards of the border, an ordinary week. But the story that spread outward from it was not ordinary at all. It traveled from world to world, gathering small details and losing others, the way all good stories do, until it settled finally into something like legend, repeated by cargo captains and station workers and children hearing it for the first time. The same simple lesson at the heart of every version. No ship goes into human space. One mistake was all it took, and the galaxy, once again, had learned the hard way exactly why the rule was never meant to be tested, and exactly why, 51 years later, it still was.